Scout of the Endless Frontier, Episode 11. Secrets of the Galactic Frontier. By Elton Gar. There weren't many places in the frontier where Vitalis Health Consortium couldn't simply send a squad of soldiers out to capture or kill Elias. And while he was likely to survive, battle was never a sure thing. That was one reason he had avoided any place civilized. But Liftin was different. A corporation, or even Ali, assuming she had gotten the promotion she expected, could still hire people to hunt him down or put a bounty out. But Liftin didn't let them operate directly. They had spent most of a century keeping the corporations off their planet, and in doing so, attracted the exact type of person who wouldn't choose to help them. Of course, that wasn't perfect. Nature abhors a vacuum, so it also attracted people willing to fill that gap. That was only part of the reason he had come to Liftin. It was also one of the largest cities in the frontier, and one of the few places where he had considered living more permanently. But he didn't need any of that. What he needed were Holt's contacts, and two of them were on Liftin. He had already made an appointment to see Leslie Horn, the president of the Liftin Planetary Council. But before that meeting, he wanted to find Holt's other contact, Ronan Vex. Vex was likely the wealthiest man in Liftin, and he ran almost all of its organized crime. He was also notoriously difficult to make direct contact with. Elias had no idea how Holt had done it, but Holt shared his directions with Elias, as well as a letter of introduction. So Elias was sitting in one of the cleaner taverns he had seen in this part of the city, drinking an angel's thorn. Holt had assured him that every time he had ordered it, he had gotten a phone call a few minutes later with directions to meet Vex. But Elias had been drinking for almost 20 minutes and hadn't been contacted. The phone call was another oddity of Liftin. Besides limiting the corporations to small embassies, which were the only places on the planet they were allowed to operate a business, Liftin also had strict technology restrictions on communications, computing, and high-tech entertainment. A somewhat eclectic assortment of banned technologies that created a vibrant social scene full of live music and plays, and made it much more difficult for the corporations to circumvent the laws. With no other good ideas, Elias grabbed the long, thin glass that was now empty and took it up to the bar. He felt absurd. Holt could order a fancy drink at a tavern, and people would think it made sense based on his clothes. Elias looked like a scout who had spent years alone on the frontier.
"I'd like another angel's thorn, please,"
Elias said, sliding it across to the thin man with the goatee, who had been carefully wiping down the bar while watching Elias for the last 20 minutes.
"He doesn't want to see you,"
the bartender said, clearly knowing why Elias was here.
"I think he does. He just doesn't know it,"
Elias said, and he took the letter of introduction Holt had given him and slid it across the bar to him. Without opening the letter, the bartender said,
"Mr. Kade, if I know who you are, my boss knows who you are, because it's his job to know when important or dangerous people visit Liftin, and you have the distinction of being both. But he has a reputation and a schedule. He doesn't wish to see you."
Elias picked up the letter and said,
"Well then, I guess he'll find out about it after I talk to President Horn, the same as everyone else."
The man considered that, then took the letter from Elias's hand and said,
"What does it say?"
"That Holt will vouch for my discretion, and that I have useful information."
Elias said. The first part was likely the more important of the two. The man's demeanor changed, and he said,
"Are you certain you want to do this? Boss Vex isn't the type of person who you threaten or waste their time."
"I already made the appointment with President Horn. My meeting will be the same, no matter what happens with Vex. I'm simply suggesting that someone whose job involves knowing things might want to find out before everyone else."
The man took out a pair of gloves, put them on, then carefully removed the letter from the paper. In most places that would have just been transferred from a tablet, but tablets were far too advanced to escape the technology laws, so paper was the next best thing. After reading it, he folded the paper carefully, put it back in the envelope, and handed it back to Elias. He then said,
"I will speak to him. If he agrees, you will need to post a 10,000 credit bond. If he finds the conversation worth his time, he will return it. Otherwise, he'll take it in return for not shooting you, for wasting his time."
Elias rubbed his forehead. Most places in the frontier Commonwealth credits were practically worthless. It took months or years to order something, and with the costs of transportation, it simply became too expensive. But Liftin was big enough that there were ships coming in regularly.
I can't transfer that many credits without a computer.
He kept credit sticks with enough credits on them to keep him going for months, but all of them together wouldn't be a quarter of what Vex was asking for one meeting.
The bank just down the street can transfer or sell bonds. Their computers just can't do anything else.
20 minutes later, Elias handed the man a freshly printed bond. The bank had charged him a 5% fee, and he suspected it was owned by Vex. But he handed it to the bartender, and a few minutes later, two men in old-style pinstripe suits arrived. The smaller of the two, who was still 2 inches taller than Elias, handed him a black bag. It was a courtesy to allow Elias to put it on himself. And they didn't even say anything when Elias lifted it up so that he could see out while they walked him to the vehicle. The car was overkill. There were a few cars in the town, but those were the standard scout vehicle, designed to take apart and put together easily and barely useful. Every piece of the body on this car was handcrafted and so polished he could see his face in it. He put the hood on once inside and even pulled the string at the bottom so that he really couldn't see anything. And if they hadn't taken him directly to Vex's location, that could have worked. But Elias didn't think that Vex let incompetent people work for him long, so he took it as the show it was. They walked him into a building and to an elevator, then almost certainly to the penthouse. Once there, one removed the bag. Elias stood in front of a wide wooden door with hand-carved flowers, each painted in a variety of bright colors. Ronan Vex's office was one of the most opulent places Elias had seen on the frontier. The floor was made of polished tiles in a complicated pattern, and paintings and tapestries hung on the walls. The desk itself was twice as large as it needed to be, and appeared to be earth oak. Even the door handle was gold. Vex was leaning back, reading a book with his booted feet on the table. An actual book, not a tablet. A quirk Elias shared. He always had a couple of paper books on the Ghostwake, but he still used a tablet most of the time, since it was hard to find new books. The man flipped the page and continued to read while Elias waited. It was a move that Elias had done often enough that he knew how to not fall for it. And so he walked over to the bookshelf and began to look over the books. He was impressed. Not so much by the books themselves, but because they looked used. Most physical books were nothing more than trophies. But these were worn in a way that spoke not only of age, but of having been read more than once, with dog-eared pages and broken spines. He picked up one and flipped through. It was a classic story about a wizard detective that Elias had heard was worth reading, but he always had a problem with books that had been written before humans discovered faster than light travel. Things were just so different. It was hard to relate. After a couple of more minutes, Ronan said,
"How can I help you, Mr. Kade?"
You can start by calling me Elias. My mother is Mr. Kade.
Setting his book down, he said,
"Have a seat, Mr. Kade."
Elias considered remaining standing, but he needed Vex's help. The chair was shorter than Vex's. Yet another tactic to gain a social advantage. It made Elias wonder why Vex felt the need to push that so hard.
I've come with a message.
Elias said. The man removed a bottle from behind the desk and said,
Is it from the council or a corporation?
Elias realized his mistake while Vex filled 2 shot glasses nearly to the brim with whiskey, then slid one across to Elias, who had to get out of the seat to reach it, and then held it awkwardly until he gave up and drank it.
No. It's from 100,000 years ago, and it's not for you specifically.
Elias said, surprised at how well the intimidation was working. He had been in plenty of more dangerous situations and kept his calm.
I suppose it wouldn't be.
Ronan said, and this time he grinned. Perhaps he had some small sense of humor after all.
You know who I am.
Elias said, not asking a question because he feared it might be rude.
Elias Kade, though I understand your nickname was Ash when you were in the military. Though from the rumors you no longer use that name.
I stopped using it when I stopped burning down villages.
Tell me what you found.
It was a warning of an ancient godlike race who from time to time purges all advanced civilization from the galaxy. I also heard rumors that one of their client races is already active somewhere deep in the wilds.
Elias said. Vex poured another glass for each of them and said, so you decided that everyone needed to know.
We need to prepare.
Elias said.
I'm going to give you a simple job. If you get back, I'll tell you why you're stupid.
Vex said.
I won't break the law for you.
I have people who break the law for me. And you'd be bad at it. Did you know there was a bounty out for you?
I suspected.
You're being hunted by Frank Timstall. He knows you're in town and is going to come for you.
Vex said.
And you want me to kill him? But I assume murder is against the law.
It's a corporate bounty. It's hard to stop people like Frank from taking those, but they discourage it by eliminating all the legal protections.
So if I kill him, no one cares.
Elias said.
I suspect people will care. But they won't do anything about it. At least not directly.
Vex said.
What can you tell me?
Vex unrolled a thick yellow piece of paper that had been tied with a black string. On it was a black and white sketch of a young man with a goatee and a wide-brimmed hat.
That could be 1,000 different people in the city.
Elias said.
An interesting observation. Perhaps that is what makes him so good at his job. But I'm willing to bet you'll be able to survive.
Vex said.
Because if I die, you win anyway.
Elias said.
I wouldn't go that far. You are a resource that could continue to be useful to me.
Knowing someone was hunting him wasn't actually useful. Elias had felt like people were watching him most of the time since the war. It was one of the reasons he had spent most of the last 5 years deep in the frontier where you rarely saw more than a few people. But he eventually spotted someone who might have been the man in the picture Vex had shown him. But having to use a still black and white image was the first time Elias had missed the use of technology since he had arrived on Liftin. A real image would have been a lot more sure. The crucial choice was to turn towards a populated area and hope that the crowds scared away the man, or find a place where Elias had an advantage. If the bounty hunter was alone, then the crowded area would be best. But if he brought help, then it would be the worst. In the end, Elias would rather rely on himself than other people, so the decision was easy. The buildings in this part of the city were mostly 3 or 4 stories tall, made of the white and red bricks that were quarried from the planet, with narrow gaps between the buildings. Some so narrow that walking between them was difficult, but he turned when he saw one that was wide enough he could stretch both of his arms almost all the way out. He continued until he was 100 feet in, then turned and put his hand on the talon. The hunter looked even younger than in the picture. Another oddity. Bounty hunting was rarely a first career path. It was better to be good at something when you started the job.
I'd hate to shoot a legend,
Frank said, his hat pulled down so that Elias couldn't see his face clearly.
No need to worry. You'll never draw that gun, before I can pull this trigger.
Elias said, but it didn't seem likely that the bounty hunter would be dumb enough to try. Bounty hunters who played fair didn't last long.
I'll make you a deal. I toss my gun on the ground, and you agree not to shoot me. Then we'll fight like men. You may get a beating, but both of us can walk out of here alive.
Elias gave himself even odds against almost anyone in a fight. But in a fight, youth was an edge. One that came with disadvantages, but Elias couldn't be sure he hadn't overcome those. And Vex had warned him about this man. But there was a simpler answer as well. If the bounty hunter wasn't alone, then holstering his gun could be the last thing Elias ever did. But you couldn't know everything, or plan for everything. You did your best, and in the end, either you survived or you didn't. So Elias slid the talon into the holster. Because he was expecting him to draw his gun, Elias was watching Frank's hand, so he saw it as it twitched upward. Not towards the gun, but towards the ear. That solved it. Elias understood why Ronan Vex had wanted him to face this man.
You know that's illegal,
He said as he began to walk forward. If he was going to get into a fist fight, the psychological battle was important, and walking forward helped him feel less fear, and hopefully made the other man question his decision.
I'm not working for the corporations. I just sell things to them. And today that is you.
Frank said.
Not that. The communication implant in your ear. You're breaking tech laws, and if I shoot you, that will be easier to prove.
Elias said. The man's hand once again began to move towards the ear, but this time he realized what he had done. He had no choice. Even if he won the fight against Elias, he'd lose as soon as Elias spilled his secret. He dove for the gun. Elias might have run, but in the narrow path running would give Frank far too much time to get his gun and shoot. So Elias drew the talon. Drawing a gun faster than someone could dive for one on the ground was absurdly easy. Anyone who had carried a sidearm for more than a few days could do it. And in the split second, he decided not to kill the kid, instead shooting him in the hand. It took the hand down to the wrist. Frank grabbed the wrist, but there was no blood and less pain than there would be if it used bullets. He was holding the stump to his chest when Elias reached him and said,
The good news is that there are no restrictions on medtech on Liftin. But you'll probably have to travel to a Vitalis station to get the hand fully regrown. Tell your boss that if they want secrets kept, they'll pay for it.
The man looked up at him and said,
She's going to kill you. She has no choice.
If he hadn't been certain before, he was now. The bartender might have told someone where Elias was at, but they wouldn't have known to ask him if they didn't know Elias was on Liftin. Frank's boss knew because Elias had made an appointment with her. He shouldn't be surprised that the second most powerful person on the planet was corrupt and working with the corporations.
I'll keep her secret. I don't care about Liftin politics. Besides, the people who matter already know. It's just useful to them that no one else does. And get the good medication. It doubles the speed of healing. And if you decide you need to come after me, remember that I could have killed you. But I am interested. Are you actually Frank?
The young man looked up at him and said,
She hires people who all look the same and has them modified to look more similar.
And because everyone uses black and white sketches instead of images, people can't see the differences.
Elias said, and then began to walk back to Vex's office. Elias wasn't supposed to know where his office was. But Vex seemed to appreciate competence, so Elias didn't bother with the bar and the blindfold. There was no appointment necessary this time, and he didn't make him wait while he finished the chapter of his book. Instead, Vex said,
So, how much did you figure out?
I figured out I hate tests. And that your bounty hunter is working for President Horn, who is working with at least one corporation to gather power. I don't know her plan. Perhaps to get enough power to let the corporations onto the planet to gain power, or just to give them as much as she can. But since you know it, I bet the mayor knows it. The direction that information moved isn't clear. If there was anything else, then perhaps I fail.
Good enough to get your credits back. Not good enough to be offered a job. Which is good because I promised to tell you that you're stupid, and I hate breaking promises.
Vex said.
I have a job. More than that, I have something I need to be working on. But I am interested in what I missed.
Elias said. Ronan considered it, then said,
I still think you can figure it out. So let me ask you, what do you want the Commonwealth to do with the information you have?
Elias probably should have thought about that before. And as he did, he realized that he really should have thought about it. Because the answer was pretty obvious. He'd want them to begin to build up a military, just like the Commonwealth was doing. They'd also want to unite as many races under one banner as they could, by any means necessary, which the Commonwealth was doing. And of course, send out scouts, so they would be warned if the enemy appeared, which they were already doing. That could mean many things. But as the grin appeared on Vex's face, Elias said,
They already know about the Nexari.
Author's note.
I do my best to keep the balance of stories in this series. Sometimes you have an episode with a lot of action, and other times it's a bit more lore. But more than anything, this series for me is about exploration. The chance to go to interesting places. And while I didn't get as deep into the exploration of Liftin as I would have liked, I think that the general feel of the place is set, and I hope all of you will want to come back as the exploration continues next week. As for the bit of revelation at the end, I hope, like any good reveal, it leaves open more questions than it answers while recontextualizing a lot of other things. How does the Commonwealth know about the Nexari? How much of what they have done is because of them? What happens when the message that Elias sent out on the pulse begins to spread the information to the public? To make sure you get the answers to those, don't forget to sign up for my newsletter at intensify.com or my Patreon at patreon.com/Elton. You can also get audio versions of these stories at my YouTube channel at Sci-Fi. Thank you. Elton Gar.